County 911, where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to ambulance immediately. My wife and child have been shot badly.
47 Moselle Road in Allison?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Stay on the line with me, okay? Yes, sir. Stay on the line with me, okay?
A name that once commanded courtrooms now stands accused within them. For a century, the Murdaughs ruled South Carolina's justice system. Feared prosecutors, connected lawyers, a dynasty built on power and privilege. But on June 7th, 2021, 2 gunshots shattered that empire forever. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, dead at the family's hunting estate. The only suspect, husband and father, Alex Murdaugh himself. What followed wasn't just a trial. It was the unraveling of a legacy. Financial fraud, staged suicide attempts, covered-up deaths, a boat crash that killed a young woman. Each revelation peeled back another layer of deception, exposing the rot beneath generations of respect. America watched as the Lowcountry's most powerful family fell from grace, one damning piece of evidence at a time. When privilege protects the guilty, can justice ever break through? Or does power write its own ending? Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from, and let us know. When legacy collides with murder, where does justice draw the line? The courtroom in Colleton County, South Carolina, pulses with anticipation on March 2nd, 2023. Every seat is filled. Reporters lean forward, cameras ready, pens poised over notebooks. Outside, crowds gather on courthouse steps. Phones raised, waiting for the verdict that will define a generation. Inside, silence hangs heavy as the jury foreperson rises. Verdict form clutched in trembling hands. The weight of history presses down on everyone present. Judge Clifton Newman's voice cuts through the tension. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreperson's words fall like stones into still water. We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, guilty of murder in the death of Margaret Murdaugh, guilty of murder in the death of Paul Murdaugh, guilty of 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Gasps ripple through the gallery. Flashbulbs explode in rapid succession. Alex Murdaugh sits motionless at the defense table, his expression unreadable. A mask that has finally cracked, but refuses to shatter completely. His attorneys slump in their chairs, exhausted, defeated. Behind him, family members weep quietly. The courtroom erupts in whispers, murmurs building to a crescendo, until Judge Newman's gavel restores order with 3 sharp strikes. Outside, the crowd roars. News anchors speak urgently into cameras, their voices competing with the chaos. Social media ignites. Within seconds, the verdict trends worldwide. A dynasty has fallen. The Murdaugh name, once synonymous with power and justice, now represents its corruption and collapse. But to understand this moment, this seismic collapse of power, we must rewind, back to where it all began, to the night when everything changed forever, back to Moselle, June 7th, 2021. The sun sets over Moselle, the sprawling Murdaugh hunting estate in Islandton, South Carolina. Spanish moss drapes from ancient oaks like tattered curtains. Crickets hum their evening chorus. The air is thick, humid, suffocating. The kind of southern heat that clings to skin and makes breathing feel like work. At 10:07 p.m., a 911 call shatters the quiet. My wife and child have been shot badly. Alex Murdaugh's voice cracks through the line. Panicked. Breathless, desperate, the dispatcher's calm, measured questions meet his frantic responses. At the kennels, they're not moving. There's so much blood. Please, you have to hurry. Colleton County deputies arrive within minutes, their headlights cutting harsh beams through the darkness. Blue lights flash across the property, illuminating century-old trees and manicured grounds. What they find near the dog kennels freezes them in place, despite years of experience. 2 bodies lie in pools of blood, the scene surreal in its violence. Maggie Murdaugh, 52 years old, shot multiple times with a rifle, her body sprawled near the feed room. Paul Murdaugh, 22, killed with a shotgun at close range near the dog pens. His injuries are catastrophic. 2 weapons, 2 lives, no witnesses except the dogs, who whimper and pace nervously. Alex stands nearby, seemingly in shock, his white t-shirt and khaki shorts spattered with blood. His hands shake as he speaks to investigators. He tells them he'd been visiting his mother, who suffers from Alzheimer's, at her home in Almeda. He returned to Moselle around 10 p.m. to find this horror. His voice trembles, his eyes dart. But even then, in those first moments, Something feels off to the seasoned detectives. The scene is too clean in places, too staged. Questions begin forming in the minds of investigators, questions that will haunt this case for months. The Murdaugh name, however, still carries weight in the Lowcountry. Investigators tread carefully, aware of the family's connections. After all, this family built the justice system here. They owned it for a century. To understand the fall, you must first understand the height from which they fell. The Murdaugh family didn't just practice law in South Carolina's Lowcountry. They were the law. They embodied it, controlled it, shaped it to their will. For nearly a century, 3 generations of Murdaughs served as elected solicitors for the 14th Judicial Circuit, controlling prosecutions across 5 counties. From 1920 to 2006, a Murdaugh held that office without interruption. 86 years of unbroken power. No other family in American legal history can claim such dominance. News footage rolls across screens. Courthouse steps where Murdaughs announced victories, campaign signs bearing their name, newspaper headlines celebrating legal triumphs. Alex's great-grandfather, Randolph Murdaugh Sr., established the family law firm in 1910. His grandfather, Randolph Buster Murdaugh Jr., became a legend, fierce in court, connected in politics, untouchable in reputation. People spoke his name with reverence and fear. His father, Randolph Murdaugh III, continued the legacy until his death in 2021, just days after the murders at Moselle. Alex himself never became solicitor, breaking the family tradition, but his law firm, Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Eltsroth, and Dietrich, known as PMPED, became one of the most successful in the state. Personal injury cases, wrongful death lawsuits, massive settlements that made clients millionaires, and the firm wealthy beyond measure. The Murdaugh name on a case meant victory, meant power, meant fear for opponents who knew they faced more than just lawyers. They faced an institution. In the Lowcountry, everyone knew the Murdaughs. Judges respected them, often deferring to their judgment. Juries trusted them implicitly. Law enforcement deferred to them, sometimes inappropriately. Politicians sought their endorsements. They owned the system, built it brick by brick, controlled its levers. Their word was law, quite literally, until it wasn't. Until the night of June 7th, 2021, when that empire began its spectacular, inevitable collapse. The first crack appeared 2 years before the murders, on February 24, 2019. A cold night, dark waters, teenage recklessness colliding with century-old privilege in a deadly combination. Paul Murdaugh, then 19 years old, drove his father's boat drunk, speeding recklessly through Archer's Creek near Beaufort. 6 teenagers aboard, all drinking, the vessel careening through darkness, alcohol flowing freely, no adult supervision, no consequences, until there were. At 2:20 a.m., traveling too fast in the dark, Paul crashed violently into the Archer's Creek bridge piling. The impact was devastating. The impact threw Mallory Beach, 19 years old, into the freezing water. She never surfaced. Her body was found a week later, recovered from the creek, a young woman with her whole life ahead, dead because of recklessness and privilege. Immediately, the Murdaugh machinery activated like a well-oiled engine. Alex arrived at the hospital where survivors were being treated, allegedly coaching witnesses, attempting to control the narrative before law enforcement could establish facts. Some survivors later claimed Paul tried to pin the blame on others, deflecting responsibility. The investigation moved slowly, suspiciously slowly for those watching. Charges against Paul took over a month to file, an eternity in such a clear-cut case. Mallory's family, devastated and furious, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Alex and Buster Murdaugh as the boat's owners. The suit demanded financial records, asset disclosures, depositions under oath. It threatened to expose the family's finances, to peer behind the curtain of Murdaugh wealth and privilege. Media coverage intensified day by day. Public outrage grew, especially among younger people tired of seeing privilege protect the guilty. For the first time in living memory, the Murdaugh shield showed visible cracks. In the Lowcountry, whispers spread through communities, bars, coffee shops. Would Paul face real consequences? Or would the name protect him again? Would justice prevail? Or would power win as it always had? The answer would never come. Paul died before trial, but the lawsuit lived on, forcing financial discovery that would uncover far darker secrets than anyone imagined. As the Beach family's lawyers dug into Alex Murdaugh's finances through civil discovery, they discovered a nightmare of fraud and deception, missing funds, forged signatures, phantom settlements created from whole cloth. Over years, systematically and deliberately, Alex had stolen from his own clients, vulnerable people who trusted him after accidents, injuries, wrongful death, people who believed he was helping them when he was robbing them blind. He'd embezzle settlement money, telling grieving clients the funds were tied up in structured accounts or trusts, when, in reality, he'd pocketed millions for himself. The schemes were elaborate, involving fake bank accounts and forged documents. The betrayal was total and calculating. The law firm, PMPED, uncovered the fraud in September 2021, just 3 months after the murders at Moselle. Confronted with evidence during a firm meeting, Alex resigned immediately. Understanding the game was over, PMPED filed a lawsuit seeking restitution. The South Carolina Bar opened an investigation into professional misconduct. The amounts staggered investigators. Over $8.7 million stolen from clients and the firm over nearly a decade. Some victims were the family of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's loyal housekeeper for over 20 years, who died in a mysterious fall at their home in 2018. Alex had promised to help them pursue wrongful death claims, positioning himself as their advocate. Then he stole their $4.3 million settlement, funneling it through fraudulent accounts. The cruelty was breathtaking. Financial analysts traced patterns of desperation in Alex's spending. He had debts everywhere, a severe drug addiction to opioids costing thousands weekly, gambling losses, lifestyle expenses maintaining the appearance of wealth. The boat crash lawsuit threatened to expose everything, to pull back the curtain on financial ruin. By mid-2021, his world was closing in rapidly. The fraud, the lawsuits, the scrutiny, walls tightening around a man who'd never faced consequences for anything. Prosecutors would later argue a chilling theory. Alex Murdaugh, cornered and desperate, chose murder over exposure. Better to be a grieving widower garnering sympathy than a disgraced thief facing prison. The theory was cold, calculated, monstrous. But as evidence mounted, piece by damning piece, it began to make terrible sense. 3 months after Maggie and Paul's murders, on September 4th, 2021, another bizarre chapter unfolded in the Murdaugh saga. Alex called 911 again, this time reporting he'd been shot on a rural roadside in Hampton County while changing a tire. A passing motorist, he claimed, fired at him without provocation before fleeing. The story unraveled within days under investigative pressure. Alex admitted he'd arranged the shooting himself, hiring Curtis Edward Smith, a former client and distant cousin, to kill him so his surviving son, Buster, could collect a $10 million life insurance policy. The plan failed spectacularly. Smith only grazed Alex's head, and both men panicked. Both were arrested shortly after. The scheme was amateurish, desperate, pathetic. The self-shooting revealed Alex's complete unraveling. Desperate, addicted, financially ruined, legally cornered from all sides, he'd resorted to staging his own death as a bizarre insurance fraud. The media frenzy exploded exponentially. Law enforcement's suspicion about the Moselle murders deepened significantly. If Alex could fake a roadside shooting and lie so boldly, could he have faked grief over Maggie and Paul? Could their deaths have been part of his desperate schemes? Public opinion shifted violently and irrevocably. The Murdaugh name, once revered and feared, became synonymous with deception, fraud, and murder. Social media buzzed constantly with theories and speculation. True crime podcasts dissected every detail obsessively. The Lowcountry, once protective of its legal dynasty, turned cold and judgmental. The empire was crumbling publicly, brick by brick, and everyone watched with fascination. As state and federal investigators dug deeper into the Murdaugh family history, old ghosts resurfaced from unmarked graves. In 2015, 19-year-old Stephen Smith was found dead on a rural road in Hampton County, his body positioned strangely. His death was officially ruled a hit and run, despite inconsistent evidence that didn't match that conclusion. For years, rumors swirled through the Lowcountry that the Murdaugh family was somehow involved, though no charges were ever filed. In 2021, after the Moselle murders, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division formally reopened Smith's case, searching for answers long buried. Then there was Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's devoted housekeeper for over 20 years. In 2018, she died after allegedly tripping over the family's dogs and falling downstairs at their home. Her death was ruled accidental without serious investigation. No autopsy was performed despite the violent nature of her injuries. Alex promised to help her sons pursue a wrongful death settlement against his homeowner's insurance. positioning himself as their advocate and protector. Then he secretly stole the entire $4.3 million payout, funneling it through fraudulent bank accounts while the sons believed the case was still pending. Both cases painted a disturbing portrait of a family operating above the law for generations, covering tracks, manipulating investigations, exploiting tragedies for profit. The courthouse corridors buzzed with speculation and dark theories. How deep did the corruption go? How many deaths? How many victims? How many lies stretched back across decades? Would we ever know the full truth? By late 2021, the Murdaugh empire wasn't just cracking, it was disintegrating in real time. And at its center stood Alex, now formally charged with the murders of his wife and son. The trial would be a reckoning, not just for one man, but for a century of unchecked power and privilege. January 25, 2023. The trial begins, and the nation watches. Colleton County Courthouse swells with anticipation. Every available space packed with observers. National media outlets set up elaborate camps outside. Satellite trucks lining the streets. Court TV broadcasts live, gavel-to-gavel coverage. Podcasters dissect every moment for millions of listeners. The prosecution team, led by Creighton Waters, methodical, precise, relentless, sits poised and confident. The defense, led by veteran attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, both formidable lawyers in their own right, prepares for the battle of their careers. Judge Clifton Newman enters, and his presence commands immediate respect. A distinguished black judge presiding over the trial of a white legal dynasty in the Deep South carries enormous symbolic weight that everyone in the courtroom recognizes. Newman is known throughout South Carolina for fairness, firmness, and an unshakable commitment to justice above all else. He'll need every ounce of that reputation in the coming weeks as the world watches his every decision. Jury selection takes days of careful vetting. The pool is questioned rigorously on every conceivable bias. Can they be impartial given the media saturation? Can they separate the Murdaugh name from the evidence? Can they handle the intense media storm swirling around them? Can they render a fair verdict under such pressure? 12 jurors and 6 alternates are finally seated, a cross-section of the community, diverse in background and experience, united only in their oath to seek truth. Opening statements crackle with tension. Creighton Waters stands, methodical and calm, his voice carrying authority. He outlines a story of desperation, deceit, and murder, driven by collapsing privilege. Alex Murdaugh killed his wife and son to buy time, Waters says evenly, to delay the financial reckoning coming for him, to gain sympathy, to distract from his crimes. He bet that being a victim would save him from being exposed as a monster. Dick Harpootlian counters sharply, his voice cutting. The state has no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, no confession, no direct evidence, just a man who found his family brutally slaughtered and has been unjustly accused by investigators who decided he was guilty before examining the evidence. He paints Alex as a victim of circumstantial evidence and public hysteria driven by media obsession. The battle lines are drawn. The nation settles in to watch. Justice will be tested. Creighton Waters approaches the jury box, his voice steady, his demeanor almost professorial. He's not interested in theatrics or emotional manipulation. He wants logic, sequence, motive, an irrefutable timeline. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, making eye contact with each juror. This case is fundamentally about a man who built an entire life on lies. When those lies threatened to destroy him and expose him completely, he made a choice. A terrible, calculated choice. Waters methodically lays out the timeline. The boat crash lawsuit closing in with devastating depositions scheduled. The financial fraud about to be publicly exposed. The law firm's confrontation scheduled for June 8th, the day after the murders. June 7th, 2021. Waters says, letting the date hang in the air, was the day Alex Murdaugh's world would end, unless he did something drastic, something unthinkable. He explains the prosecution's theory carefully, building it brick by brick. Maggie and Paul's deaths would buy sympathy from the community, delay legal proceedings indefinitely, distract investigators from financial crimes. He wagered their lives against his freedom, Waters says, his voice hardening. He killed them to save himself, and he lost that bet. The jury listens intently, some taking detailed notes, others staring directly at Alex, who sits expressionless at the defense table. Waters introduces the concept of family annihilators, people who kill loved ones when facing complete ruin, unable to face the collapse of their constructed identity. It's chilling, it's calculated, and it plants a crucial seed in the jury's collective consciousness. Across the aisle, Harpootlian leans back in his chair, watching, waiting, calculating his response. He knows the state's burden is high, proof beyond reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt is his ally, his shield. The prosecution's narrative is compelling and emotionally satisfying. But compelling isn't proof. Not yet. Not until they connect every piece. The first forensic experts take the stand, and the courtroom atmosphere transforms into something resembling a crime scene laboratory. Photographs appear on large screens, gruesome, haunting images of Maggie and Paul's bodies near the kennels. Some jurors wince but force themselves not to look away. This is their duty. A SLED agent, professional and precise, walks the jury through the scene using a laser pointer. Maggie Murdaugh was shot 5 times with a .300 blackout rifle. The wounds indicate she was moving, possibly trying to run or take cover. Paul Murdaugh was shot twice with a 12-gauge shotgun. Once in the chest, once in the head at extremely close range. The agent uses detailed diagrams, laser pointers, precise measurements. Trajectory analysis shows the shooter's likely positions during the attack. Blood spatter patterns tell a story of violence, chaos, but also calculation and intent. Forensic experts testify about gunshot residue found on Alex's clothing, minute particles consistent with very recent firearm discharge. The defense immediately challenges this finding. Residue can transfer easily, Harpootlian argues, forcefully during cross-examination. Mr. Murdaugh examined the bodies, cradled his son. He could have picked up residue through that contact, but the prosecution presses back hard. Why would residue be on his shirt, his shorts, even inside his pockets? Waters asks the expert pointedly. The expert, experienced and unshakable, nods. The pattern and concentration are consistent with proximity to the actual discharge of firearms, not secondary transfer from touching contaminated surfaces. Each detail, each scientific test, each photograph adds weight to the prosecution's case. The jury absorbs it all, their expressions growing heavier with each revelation. Outside the courthouse, the media dissects every revelation in real time. Inside, the prosecution methodically builds its case, brick by scientific brick, creating a structure that seems increasingly impossible to topple. Then comes the moment that changes everything, the revelation that will define the entire trial. The courtroom dims slightly. A video file is cued on the screens. It's from Paul Murdaugh's cell phone, recovered from the scene, time-stamped 8:44 p.m. on June 7, 2021, just minutes before the murders occurred. The video plays. It shows the kennel, the dogs moving around. Paul's voice narrates casually, playfully, documenting something mundane about the animals. Then, in the background, another voice emerges. Unmistakable, clear, undeniable to anyone who knows it. "Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth." It's Alex Murdaugh's voice, captured digitally by Paul's phone. At the kennels, at 8:44 p.m., exactly where he swore under oath he never was that night. Gasps erupt throughout the courtroom. Jurors lean forward, some with mouths slightly open. Alex stares at the screen, his face draining of color, pale as death. For months, through interviews, statements, and testimony, he'd told investigators repeatedly that he wasn't at the kennels that night. He'd said he was at the main house, then left to visit his mother. His alibi, central to his entire defense strategy, has just been obliterated by his own voice preserved digitally by his murdered son. Waters pauses dramatically, letting the moment breathe, letting the implications sink into every mind in the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says quietly but firmly, "that is the defendant's voice." At the scene, minutes before his wife and son were brutally murdered, Harpootlian objects loudly, demanding an immediate sidebar, arguing prejudice and improper foundation. But the damage is catastrophically done. The kennel video is the prosecution's smoking gun, not literally, but metaphorically devastating. Alex's credibility, already shaky, collapses completely in that moment. If he lied about being at the kennels, about something so fundamental, what else did he lie about? What else is he capable of? Outside the courthouse, news breaks instantly across every platform. Headlines scream about the revelation. Legal analysts call it the turning point of the entire trial. Inside, the jury's faces reveal everything. They've seen a man caught in a lie. A big lie. A lie about being at the murder scene. Momentum shifts decisively after the video revelation. In late February, before the kennel video was played, Judge Newman makes a critical and controversial ruling. The financial evidence is admissible at trial. The defense had fought desperately hard to exclude it, arguing strenuously it would prejudice the jury, painting Alex as a bad person rather than proving he's a murderer. But Newman disagrees after careful consideration. The financial evidence is directly relevant to motive, Newman rules from the bench. The jury is entitled to understand the full context and pressures facing the defendant at the time of the murders. Motive is a legitimate element for their consideration. Waters seizes the opening immediately. Financial analysts, forensic accountants, and investigators testify in detail about the millions stolen, the loans coming due, the lawsuits closing in like a vice. On June 7, 2021, Alex Murdaugh faced potential disbarment, certain criminal charges, and complete financial ruin. The Beach family's lawyers were aggressively demanding depositions and comprehensive records. His law firm had scheduled a confrontation about missing fees for the very next day. He was completely out of moves, Waters tells the jury emphatically. Out of time, out of options, out of lies that would work. The defense fights back vigorously. Financial crimes don't make someone a murderer, Harpootlian argues passionately. The state is desperately trying to convict Alex for being a thief, not for these deaths. They want you to hate him so much you'll convict him without real proof. But the jury can see the pattern clearly. Desperation breeds desperate acts. Cornered animals are dangerous. Day by day, witness by witness, exhibit by exhibit, the noose tightens around Alex's neck. His shifting stories. First he wasn't at the kennels at all. Then he was but left early. Then his memory was foggy from opioids. Systematically erode any remaining trust or credibility. Each contradiction becomes ammunition for the prosecution. Each lie exposed becomes another nail. More investigators take the stand, patiently walking the jury through complex timelines, detailed phone records, and glaring inconsistencies in Alex's accounts. His cell phone showed highly unusual activity on the night of the murders. Calls deleted, apps opened and closed rapidly, patterns consistent with someone covering digital tracks. GPS data from his vehicle revealed movements and locations he hadn't disclosed to investigators, places he couldn't explain. One seasoned SLED agent testifies about Alex's behavior during early interviews, his demeanor and priorities. He seemed more concerned with managing his image and how he appeared than with actually finding the killer, the agent recalls. He kept saying repeatedly, "I didn't do this," before we even suggested he had. It was unusual. The defense's cross-examinations grow sharper, more aggressive, more desperate. Harpootlian attacks the investigation's handling relentlessly. "You never properly secured the crime scene, did you?" he demands. "You allowed contamination. You rushed to judgment because of the family's name and the media pressure. You decided Alex was guilty and worked backwards from that conclusion." Some investigators stumble slightly under the aggressive questioning, admitting minor procedural missteps and imperfections. The defense exploits every crack, every hesitation, every admission. But the foundation holds firm. The sheer overwhelming volume of circumstantial evidence, each individual piece perhaps weak standing alone, but together creating an undeniable web, creates a net from which Alex seemingly cannot escape. Outside the courthouse, public opinion hardens into certainty. Polls show the vast majority of Americans believe he's guilty. True crime communities obsessively dissect every detail, every piece of testimony. The trial becomes a national obsession, a real-time morality play about privilege, justice, accountability, and whether the system works when the powerful are finally held to account. Forensic experts return to the stand with increasingly precise and damning testimony. Blood spatter analysts describe in technical detail the patterns on Alex's clothing, the positions of the bodies based on blood evidence, the likely sequence of shots fired. Based on the evidence, Maggie was likely shot first, one expert explains methodically. Paul heard the shots, came running to help, and was ambushed near the kennels. Ballistics experts discuss the weapons in detail, never recovered despite extensive searches. The killer used two different guns, they confirm with certainty, a rifle and a shotgun. Both were likely taken from the Murdaugh property's extensive collection. The defense immediately pounces on this point. So anyone with access to the property could potentially be the killer, Harpootlian suggests pointedly, yet you focused exclusively on Alex without seriously investigating alternatives. But the prosecution counters with behavioral analysis and practical considerations. A firearms expert testifies about residue patterns, weapon handling mechanics, and the physical and mental demands of using two different weapons in rapid succession during a violent attack. This wasn't a random act by a stranger, the expert concludes firmly. It required intimate familiarity with the victims, detailed knowledge of the property layout, and access to the weapons. The evidence points to someone who lived there. Photographs cycle continuously on the screens, haunting, clinical, irrefutable visual evidence. Maggie's final moments, reconstructed through blood trails and shell casings. Paul's defensive wounds suggesting he saw his killer's face, recognized them. The jury examines every image with intense focus, their faces etched with gravity and the weight of judgment. This isn't just testimony. It's a comprehensive story told in evidence, each exhibit a chapter in a terrible narrative. Beyond the courtroom walls, the trial reverberates through American culture like an earthquake. News networks devote hours of primetime coverage every evening. Podcasts explode with theories, speculation, and minute-by-minute analysis. Online forums debate guilt and innocence passionately. The Murdaugh name becomes shorthand for the fall of privilege, the long-overdue reckoning of powerful white families in the South who operated above the law for generations. Protesters gather outside the courthouse daily, some demanding justice for Maggie and Paul, holding signs with their photos, others calling for fairness for Alex and due process. The community divides along complex lines. Old loyalists defend the Murdaugh legacy, remembering the good the family did. Younger generations see overdue accountability, a system finally working. Racial dynamics simmer beneath the surface. Quiet conversations about how a black defendant might have been treated differently. How quickly justice moves when white victims have a white killer from a prominent family. Inside the courtroom, reporters fill every available seat, typing furiously on laptops, tweeting constant updates, filing stories on impossible deadlines. Court TV's cameras capture every moment, broadcasting to millions of viewers nationwide. The trial becomes a mirror reflecting society's obsession with true crime, privilege, power, and the rare sight of a powerful person actually facing consequences. Judge Newman maintains order with firm grace, acutely aware of the historical weight pressing down. This trial will be studied, debated, and dissected for generations in law schools and journalism programs. Every ruling must withstand intense future scrutiny. The pressure is immense, unrelenting, but Newman never wavers in his commitment to fairness. March 1st, 2023. The prosecution rests its case. The courtroom exhales collectively, the tension momentarily broken as everyone processes weeks of testimony. Creighton Waters has presented over 60 witnesses, hundreds of exhibits, thousands of pages of testimony and evidence. The case is built, entirely circumstantial but comprehensive and methodical, damning in its cumulative totality. The jury looks completely exhausted, emotionally and mentally drained. They've absorbed horrific crime scene photographs, complex financial testimony, and emotionally wrenching accounts. They've seen Alex's lies exposed systematically layer by layer. They've heard his voice on the kennel video, the lie that unraveled his entire defense. Now they wait to hear the other side of the story. Harpootlian and Griffin confer quietly at the defense table, acutely aware of the steep uphill battle ahead. The defense's strategy has always centered on doubt, planting seeds of uncertainty, of questioning investigative methods, humanizing Alex as flawed but not murderous. But doubt alone might not be sufficient now. They need to aggressively shift the narrative to give the jury a viable alternative explanation that makes sense. Outside, legal analysts and commentators debate the strength of the case endlessly. The prosecution's case is extraordinarily strong but entirely circumstantial. One seasoned commentator notes carefully, everything points directly to Alex, but there's no smoking gun, no eyewitness, no confession, no murder weapon. Another counters, sometimes the complete absence of any other logical explanation is itself the explanation. Circumstantial evidence can be more reliable than eyewitness testimony. The media circus intensifies to a fever pitch. The nation waits anxiously. The defense's turn has finally come. Can they create reasonable doubt from the mountain of evidence against their client? Dick Harpootlian rises deliberately, his voice sharp, experienced, defiant. carrying decades of courtroom authority. Ladies and gentlemen, he begins, making direct eye contact with jurors. The state has given you elaborate speculation dressed up as evidence. They've systematically painted my client as a monster to distract from their fundamental lack of direct proof. The defense's case focuses intensively on investigative failures and procedural problems. Expert witnesses testify about contaminated evidence, rushed forensic work, and investigative tunnel vision. SLED decided Alex was guilty on day one. Harpootlian argues forcefully. They never seriously pursued other viable leads or alternative suspects. They saw the Murdaugh name and wanted to take down a dynasty. Defense witnesses suggest various alternative theories. Drug dealers Paul had allegedly angered through reckless behavior, vengeful clients seeking revenge against Alex, random violence that plagues rural South Carolina. None of the theories gain real traction with the jury. They feel desperate, reaching, implausible compared to the prosecution's cohesive narrative backed by mountains of evidence. Chain of custody becomes a major battleground. Defense experts aggressively question how evidence was collected, stored, and tested. Contamination could easily explain residue findings, one defense expert suggests. Procedural errors and shortcuts cast reasonable doubt on everything presented, but the jury appears skeptical, their body language suggesting they're not buying the argument. Harpootlian tries desperately to rehumanize Alex, presenting him as a deeply flawed man, an addict struggling with demons, a liar who made terrible choices, but not a cold-blooded murderer of his own family. Yes, he stole money. Yes, he lied repeatedly, but that doesn't make him a killer of his wife and son. It's an incredibly tough sell when the jury has watched the lies pile up like cordwood for weeks. Then Alex Murdaugh makes the most dangerous high-stakes decision of his entire life. He takes the witness stand in his own defense. The courtroom crackles with electric anticipation. Defendants testifying in their own murder trials is rare, extraordinarily risky, and often disastrous. Experienced defense attorneys almost always advise against it, but Alex insists, believing he can convince the jury of his innocence through sheer force of personality. His testimony begins with raw emotion, voice cracking, eyes wet with tears. He describes in agonizing detail finding Maggie and Paul's bodies. "I saw my wife's body first, and I ran to Paul," he sobs convincingly. "I tried desperately to check for a pulse, but there was so much blood everywhere. So much blood. I knew they were gone." Jurors watch intently, studying his face for signs of genuine grief or performance. Some seem moved by the display. Others remain stone-faced, unmoved. Alex admits his lies directly, attempting to diffuse their impact. "I wasn't truthful about being at the kennels that night. I was paranoid from the opioid pills. My mind wasn't working right. I thought I'd automatically be blamed because of everything else." He explains the opioid addiction in detail, the financial crimes he committed, the desperation that consumed him. "I'm a thief. I'm a drug addict. I'm a terrible person who hurt people I love, but I did not kill my family. I could never do that. It's a precarious high-wire act, confession without conviction, remorse without accepting responsibility for murder." For brief moments, it seems to work. Alex appears genuinely broken, human, and tragic rather than cold and monstrous. But then comes the moment everyone has been waiting for, cross-examination by Creighton Waters. Creighton Waters stands slowly, deliberately, papers in hand, his expression calm but unmistakably predatory. He's been waiting patiently for this moment throughout the entire trial. "Mr. Murdaugh, you lied to investigators repeatedly and systematically, correct?" "Yes, I did." "You lied specifically about being at the kennels the night your wife and son were murdered?" "Yes." "You lied extensively about your finances and the money you stole?" "Yes." "You lied about the roadside shooting you staged?" "Yes." Waters doesn't shout or engage in theatrics. He simply, methodically dismantles, question by question, lie by lie. He exposes the pattern of deception that defined Alex's entire life. Alex's answers grow increasingly defensive, evasive, less confident. His composure visibly slips as the cross-examination continues relentlessly. Then Waters plays the kennel video again on the courtroom screens. The voice emerges clearly. "Hey! He's got a bird in his mouth." Waters pauses it. "That's your voice. Absolutely correct?" Alex nods, completely deflated. "Yes, that's me. You lied about that for months, even though your son's phone captured irrefutable truth. Even though Paul's last act, innocently recording that video, proved beyond doubt you lied. You looked investigators directly in the eye repeatedly and lied, knowing that phone existed. I was scared of what, Mr. Murdaugh? Scared of the truth? The exchange is absolutely devastating to watch. Waters doesn't directly accuse Alex of murder during the cross-examination. He doesn't need to make that leap. He simply shows the jury, clearly and undeniably, a man for whom lying is pure instinct, for whom truth is completely negotiable and flexible. If Alex lied so easily about everything else, repeatedly, elaborately, without hesitation, why should anyone believe him about the murders? The implication hangs heavy in the silent courtroom. By the time Alex finally steps down from the witness stand, his testimony has catastrophically backfired. The human mask he tried to project slipped badly, revealing cold calculation beneath the practiced tears. The enormous gamble has failed completely. March 1st, 2023. Closing arguments begin, and the courtroom falls into profound silence, packed with observers, electric with anticipation. This is the final battle, the last opportunity for both sides to reach the jury's collective conscience and shape their ultimate decision. Creighton Waters speaks first, his voice measured but increasingly passionate. For over a century, he begins, the Murdaugh family used their enormous power, their political influence, their respected name to escape accountability for anything. Alex Murdaugh thought he could escape justice this time, too. Thought he could brutally kill his wife and son, then use sympathy and masterful manipulation to walk free as he always had. Waters recounts the evidence methodically and comprehensively. The overwhelming financial motive, the damning timeline, the kennel video that destroyed his alibi, the systematic lies, the gunshot residue, the complete absence of any other logical suspect. When you put all the pieces together honestly, Waters says, there's only one possible conclusion. Alex Murdaugh murdered Maggie and Paul to save himself from exposure and ruin. He addresses the victim's family directly, his tone softening with genuine emotion. Paul and Maggie can't speak for themselves anymore, but the evidence speaks powerfully for them. The video Paul recorded speaks for them. Justice must speak for them now. Harpootlian's rebuttal is fierce and passionate. The state desperately wants you to convict Alex because he's a liar and a thief, but this is a murder trial, not a morality test or character judgment. There's no eyewitness, no murder weapon, no confession, no direct evidence, just suspicion built on circumstantial inference. He hammers the concept of reasonable doubt relentlessly, questioning every piece of evidence, every conclusion drawn. Don't let emotion and disgust override reason and the law. The jury listens in complete silence, visibly burdened by the crushing weight of the decision before them. March 2nd, 2023. Before deliberations can begin, unexpected drama strikes. A juror is dismissed by Judge Newman for discussing the case with unauthorized individuals outside the courthouse, directly violating explicit court rules. Newman replaces her with an alternate juror. The defense protests vigorously, arguing the timing creates unfair pressure on the jury, but Newman proceeds, confident in his decision. The 12 jurors file solemnly into the deliberation room. The nation collectively holds its breath. Legal experts on television predict days of careful deliberation, given the case's extraordinary complexity and the mountain of evidence. Public sentiment leans heavily toward conviction, but verdicts are never certain until announced. Hours pass slowly. Analysts fill endless airtime with speculation and repetitive analysis. Outside the courthouse, large crowds gather, sensing instinctively the end is near. Inside the deliberation room, the jury works systematically through evidence, testimony, and doubt. They request specific transcripts, re-examine key photographs, debate motive versus absolute proof. 3 hours. That's all it takes. At exactly 6:41 p.m., word spreads rapidly through the courthouse. The jury has reached a verdict. Shock ripples through legal commentators and observers. Such swift deliberation in a complex case usually signals absolute clarity, either clear innocence or overwhelming, undeniable guilt. The courtroom reassembles rapidly, people rushing to their seats. Judge Newman takes the bench with grave dignity. Alex Murdaugh stands at the defense table, his face ashen, drained of color, hands gripping the table edge. The foreperson rises slowly, verdict forms clutched in steady hands. Millions across the nation watch live. History holds its breath. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The words echo through the courtroom, final and absolute. Guilty of murdering Margaret Murdaugh. Guilty of murdering Paul Murdaugh. Guilty on all counts without exception or mercy. The courtroom immediately reacts. Gasps, muffled sobs, Urgent whispers. Alex shows almost no visible emotion, just a slight sag in his shoulders, a small exhalation. His attorneys close their eyes in defeat. Behind him, family members weep openly. Some in profound grief, some perhaps in relief that it's finally over. Outside, the gathered crowd erupts in cheers and chants of justice. News networks interrupt all regular programming. Social media platforms explode with reactions. Justice for Maggie and Paul trends worldwide within minutes. The swiftness of the verdict sends a powerful message. The evidence was crystal clear, the lies transparent, the guilt undeniable to 12 ordinary citizens. Judge Newman thanks the jury formally for their service, acknowledging the burden they carried. They file out exhausted, their faces revealing the emotional and mental toll. The trial is over. Sentencing will follow the next day, but the outcome is permanently sealed. That night, America processes the verdict in millions of conversations. Commentators praise the prosecution's meticulous, patient case building. Defense attorneys promise immediate appeals. True crime communities obsessively dissect every detail of the verdict. In the Lowcountry, old-timers shake their heads in amazement, marveling at the fall. A century of Murdaugh power and privilege ended definitively in 3 hours of jury deliberation. For Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, there is no resurrection, no return. But there is accountability. There is justice. Finally, after everything, justice has spoken clearly. March 3rd, 2023. Sentencing day arrives. Judge Clifton Newman's expression is profoundly grave as Alex Murdaugh stands before him one final time. The courtroom is quieter today, more solemn, the spectacle replaced by the weight of final judgment. Newman speaks, his words measured, powerful, and carefully chosen. The evidence of your guilt is overwhelming and disturbing. You've betrayed the sacred trust of your family, your profession, and your community. You've taken the lives of 2 people who loved you unconditionally, who trusted you completely. For that unconscionable act, there is only one appropriate sentence under the law: 2 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. The gavel falls with finality. Alex Murdaugh will die in prison. He's led away in chains and shackles, his expression blank and emotionless, the fight completely drained from him. The Murdaugh dynasty, built painstakingly over a century through 3 generations, ends in chains and disgrace. Newman's closing words resonate through the courtroom and beyond. Justice may have been delayed, but it has not been denied. This verdict reminds us that no one, no family, no legacy, no name, no matter how powerful, is above the law. Media reactions are immediate and overwhelming. Headlines call it the end of an era, justice for the victims, the fall of a legal empire. Legal scholars and historians note the trial's significance. A powerful family finally held accountable. The justice system working despite immense privilege and connections. But the Murdaugh story doesn't end with sentencing. In the months following the verdict, new controversies emerged that threaten the conviction's finality. Rebecca "Becky" Hill, the clerk of court who presided over trial logistics, releases a book about the case, seeking to profit from her proximity to the proceedings. Then comes the shocking bombshell: credible allegations that Hill improperly influenced jurors, made inappropriate comments during trial, and actively sought to ensure conviction to boost her book sales. A juror comes forward publicly, claiming Hill told her directly not to trust Alex during his testimony, pressured her toward conviction, and made prejudicial comments. The defense immediately files extensive motions for a new trial, arguing systematic jury tampering that violated Alex's constitutional rights. Investigations open at multiple levels. Hill's credibility and integrity collapse under scrutiny. The South Carolina Supreme Court agrees to review the serious allegations carefully. Meanwhile, federal charges continue piling up relentlessly. Alex pleads guilty to financial fraud in federal court, formally admitting to stealing millions from dozens of victims. More convictions, more lengthy sentences, all running concurrent with his state murder sentences. Every revelation reinforces the portrait of a man who operated completely without conscience or moral boundaries. The deaths of Stephen Smith and Gloria Satterfield remain under active investigation, though no charges have yet been filed directly linking them to the Murdaugh family. Their families continue seeking justice and answers. Their cases now reopened, their stories now recognized as part of the larger pattern and reckoning. Appeals continue through the legal system as expected. Defense attorneys argue procedural errors, jury tampering, judicial bias, and constitutional violations. Legal experts predict many years of continued litigation and review, but very few believe the murder verdict will ultimately be overturned. The evidence supporting guilt was simply too strong, too comprehensive, too overwhelming. By late 2024, the Murdaugh trial stands firmly as a significant cultural touchstone in American consciousness. Documentaries dissect every angle and detail. Books analyze the family's dramatic rise and catastrophic fall. Podcasts explore the psychology of family annihilators and the psychology of privileged criminals who believe they're untouchable. The case becomes a valuable teaching tool in law schools, journalism programs, and ethics courses nationwide. For the Lowcountry communities, the trial forces a painful but necessary reckoning with history and power structures. Difficult conversations about power, privilege, and criminal justice system reform intensify and spread. Communities honestly debate whether the Murdaughs were a unique anomaly or merely a symptom of deeper systemic corruption spanning generations. Old power structures face questions. New voices demand accountability and transparency. Moselle, the estate where Maggie and Paul died violently, sits empty and abandoned. The property languishes on the market, but few potential buyers want to purchase land literally soaked in tragedy and blood. The kennels remain standing, silent witnesses to unspeakable violence. Spanish moss still drapes gracefully from the ancient oaks, but the air feels fundamentally different now, haunted, heavy with terrible memory and grief. The Murdaugh name, once synonymous with justice and legal excellence, now represents both its corruption and eventual triumph over that corruption. A century of accumulated power couldn't ultimately protect Alex from truth and consequences. In the end, two voices, Maggie's eternal silence and Paul's accidental video recording, spoke far louder than any dynasty ever could. Justice arrived late, painfully late. But it arrived. The empire fell, not to violence or armed rebellion, but to the patient, relentless machinery of law and evidence. In a courtroom where Murdaughs once commanded absolute respect and deference, one of their own stood convicted and sentenced. The circle closed. The dynasty ended. Power finally met accountability. And the haunting question lingers, whispered in courthouse corridors and living rooms across America. How many other powerful families and individuals currently operate above accountability? And what will it ultimately take for justice to find them too?